Hey, welcome, inspirers, to another episode of Amputate to Elevate Success podcast, where we explore what leaders have to release in order to rise. I'm your host, John Register, Paralympic silver medalist, combat Army veteran, Hall of Fame speaker, and your guide to the high-stakes transitions that define leadership today. This episode was born out of a personal revelation. After losing my left leg, I discovered that we don't overcome adversity. We adapt through it. And in that adaptation, we find the courage to amputate whatever no longer serves us, old mindsets, outdated strategies, limiting beliefs, in order to elevate into our next level of purpose, power, and performance. This show is part of the Elevate Life Executive Strategy Sessions on Beehive, where we help executives sharpen their communication skills, lead with clarity, and navigate transitions with grace. Now, each week I sit down with a senior leader, a CEO, or change maker to unpack the moments that shaped their journey and the decisions that define their success. And then we have the chance to learn around 9 p.m. Eastern on Saturday night everything they said. Well, I pick out at least 3 things. Now, before we dive in, do me a favor. If this episode brings you value, like it, share it, and hit that follow button. And also just share it with a friend, because friends are always better to share information with when you have something great to share. Now, today's guest, get ready. She's brilliant, she's bold, and she's building a movement around decision-making that prioritizes both career and connection. Abby Davisson is the co-author of groundbreaking book, Money and Love, a Fortune 200 leader turned founder of the Money and Love Institute and a former president of the Gap Foundation. She's here to talk about how we make life's biggest decisions, not just in business, but in messy, beautiful intersections of our personal and professional lives. You're going to walk away with practical tools for decision-making, clarity, and your core values, and the courage to pursue paths that defy either. Stick around. We'll begin right after this. I told you, ladies and gentlemen, I have her. I captured her. She's in my box on the Zoom. Abby Davisson, thank you so much for being on with us today.
I am so delighted to be here, John. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So the first question, Abby, that I always ask my guests is, you've had a lot of success in your career and you continue to have success. What have you had to amputate in order to elevate to that success?
I have had to amputate the idea that others get to define success. And the way I am elevating is to say, now I get to define success on my own terms. For the first long time, many decades of my life, I jumped through a lot of hoops. I earned a lot of degrees from institutions you just mentioned and attached myself to well-known brands. And at some point, I realized I need to bet on myself instead of letting other people's ideas of success define me and my path.
Well, there's a story there. Go a little deeper.
Well, so my mom was a children's librarian and my dad was a public health executive. So I like to say that I was born with a book in my hands and a desire to help people improve their well-being. And I am a voracious reader. I devoured books all growing up, but never thought of myself as a writer or as an author. I enjoyed it, but I would not use that term to define myself. And I had the opportunity to collaborate with a mentor of mine, my former professor. And even, we started working on this book together, Money and Love, all about big life decisions. And even as the book was under contract, the manuscripts were being delivered, I had a hard time calling myself an author because in my mind, the book wasn't born yet. It was like, still gestating. And so at one point, someone said to me, "Of course you're an author. Like you've seen a picture of a book with your name on it. Yeah, that's an author." And I was like, okay, yeah, like I get to call myself an author. And so I think this idea of like, you get to define who you are, your identity, what you call yourself. You don't need to wait for someone externally to define that for you. That has been a lesson that I'm still learning, and I'm teaching my kids and teaching others through my speaking and coaching and advising work.
When I think about this, and I'm thinking about it from my little model of the reckoning, revision, and renewal, a lot of times people are afraid to make that commitment, that jump, whether it's a physical jump that they have to make the leap from leaving a job, leaving career, or it's a mental shift in what, like you were just explaining, that I can give myself permission to do X, Y, or Z. What makes people hesitate, in your opinion, from not making that leap?
Fear,
Hmm. Of
um,
what? What do you think?
of the unknown. Of certainly in my research, a lot of people say that they don't want to make the wrong decision. I study decision making, right? So this idea that there is a quote unquote right decision and that they somehow need to kind of get something right in order to act, that is a huge fallacy. It is definitely one of, in the research on regret, one of the things we know is that people don't regret the risks they do take. It's the risks that they don't take that might lead to connection or growth or a more healthy future for themselves when it comes to finances or physical health, mental health. They don't regret those risks, even when the decision doesn't turn out the way they thought it might. They don't regret acting, they regret inacting. So we know that from the research, but then it is this idea of action that is very scary because it means change, and humans don't like change. And sometimes, we don't like to challenge the status quo for ourselves, but then sometimes even the people closest to us don't want us to change. And so that's a challenge in and of itself. And part of why we developed a decision-making framework, which I'm sure we'll talk about, is to help bring in the others involved in a decision so you can evolve together.
And that's what you read my mind. That's exactly where I want to go. About the five decision framework and making the guidepost. How did you, when you're thinking about this, how did you personally revise your framework to make the biggest decision of your career, kind of leaving Gap, leaving corporate America to build your own mission-driven work?
Yeah, so we have a framework in our book. We call it the 5 Cs. And one of the reasons we have a framework is that we know from our research that many people make decisions either too quickly, they're sort of gut trusters, and they have a bad day and they say, I don't like my boss. Like maybe they got a new boss and they say, I'm just going to leave this job, right? And it's like they come home and they say, honey, guess what? Like I decided to leave my
What
job, and
happened?
it's like, what? Or they agonize for years, right? They might have not had a good day at work for over a year, and yet they feel like they cannot take that risk. They cannot take the leap. So, one of the reasons we came up with the framework was to get people to slow down if they tend to act too quickly, or to speed up if they tend to overanalyze things, and follow a research and evidence-based path that we know leads to people feeling more confident about their decisions. And so the 5C framework is, I'll just touch on it at a high level and then I'll
Absolutely.
talk about how I applied it to myself, is your question. So the first C is to clarify what's most important to you. That is getting the inside view. The second C is to communicate with those most affected by the decision, and clarify and communicate go together. You might clarify, then you share your point of view with someone, listen to theirs. You might change your mind as a result of hearing their own perspective. The third C is to consider a broad range of choices. Now you're starting to get what Daniel Kahneman called the outside view. And that helps you with the fourth C, which is to check in with trusted resources. And choices and check in go together because when you check in with other people who might have faced that same decision, you expand your consideration set, right? It becomes not the either I stay at this job or I quit. You might find some creative solution in between. And the fifth C is to explore likely consequences across different time horizons. You're starting to do a little bit of prediction, of forecasting, understanding how this might play out, best and worst case scenarios, and then you can go from there. So the framework was definitely one that I have road tested myself, not on smooth paths that were, predictable, but definitely on like the rocky, you're in a Jeep and there are, big potholes type of paths. And I wrote this book while I was working full time. I had two young kids. It was during kind of the early part of COVID where we were all zooming in to kids were zooming into school. I was zooming into my executive role at Gap. My husband was zooming into he was in a CFO role. And I I wasn't ready to take the leap, but as the book became more fully formed and as I continued to do the introspection that helps you with the clarify step, I realized that my work, my day job, and my purpose, why I was put on this planet, were increasingly not overlapping parts of the Venn diagram. And so I did a lot of communication with my husband. In fact, he had at that point left his CFO job, was getting recruited for other CFO roles. And so we would go on hikes. And one of the things about communicating is that you need to be not only thinking about what you say, but where you're going to communicate, how will you make space for the expansive thinking that is part of this taking a big leap when there's a mortgage and two kids and lots of reasons not to leap, frankly. And one day he said to me, I'm getting these calls for other CFO roles. Should I take them? And I think he sort of expected me to say, sure, take the call. And I said, well, you didn't really love your last CFO role, did you? And he said, no, I wouldn't say that. And he talked about wanting to start his own company. And I had always had entrepreneurial aspirations too. And as soon as he said he wanted to do it, I was suddenly like, well, I don't want to be trapped in this corporate role forever. I also want to do this. And so, we started to have these conversations. We did some math. We tried to figure out, can we make this work, this simultaneous entrepreneurship? We, checked in with other folks who had taken that path. And, ultimately, I would not say it was a one moment that was, I made the decision, but it was a series of moments, a series of experiments. I started to do more speaking. I started to, I continued to write, which was always something that got me into flow. And there was a point at which I felt like I was being pulled more towards this work than I was being kept in my role, by the job. And once we figured out our math and that we could, make our lives work while doing the simultaneous entrepreneurship, then I knew I would regret if I didn't give it my full effort. So that's what helped me take the leap.
That's remarkable. Uh, I know mine came. There's I'm lots of thoughts in my head right now. Um, but one of them is I was one of those people that was in a role that was now misaligned. I used to, it was so great because the values were just so aligned. It was amazing. And then there was a shift that happened where our values then crossed. And I no longer could unsee what I was seeing. So then I was in this, I was in, like, gosh, it was hard to show up for work because I knew I'm no longer being invited to the meetings because I want to express my opinions on the way we need to go because we have to grow this thing. And the way we're doing it's not, in my opinion, at that point, was not the way to do it. We were kind of cherry picking and we need to grow a system and put a system in place and a pipeline of talent. And so that was, caused this kind of angst. And I didn't just leave because if I would have had the map of clarity of communication, considering a broader range, checking in, and consequences, I think it was the consequences that I was leaning into the most on the negative side of consequences, not the positive side of consequences. Because I had my family and I had kids that were about to go to college and I had, all these things and I have to, in my mind, I have to stay because if I don't, then I'm going to lose all these benefits and all these other things that go to make the household run. Is that what you see with your clientele right now and these binary choices that we just sort of get trapped in? And then if so, then how do we expand the choices from the binary to multiple?
Yes, I think you highlighted something really important is that two things. Our brains are wired to think about the negative. So we are evolutionarily primed to notice the negative. So we always think about the sort of downside consequences. And then we also really are evolutionarily primed to think about the short term. So we kind of over index on what are the negative short term consequences of a lot of the choices. So part of what helps us get past those innate biases that we have is to trick our brains. So you have to start thinking about, ask yourself, yes, there are these downside choices, downside consequences that I see. What is the upside? What might I do? What could be, if this next venture succeeds beyond my wildest dreams, what would that look like? And then think about over the long term. So one of the things, and I'll be very transparent, I had no problem working many hours, outside of a traditional, 9 to 5 role. When my kids were young, I was happy to outsource a lot of their care. I knew they were being well cared for, and I still got to have the relationship. But as my kids started to get into middle school, started to get into the grades where they were not only forming their values, they were making friendships, they were having more complex academic challenges, more tricky social challenges, I actually felt like I wanted to be more present for them at non-traditional times. And so one of the things that started to matter much more to me was this idea of I had a lot of flexibility in my role. I mean, as an executive, you certainly, I managed teams from India all the way to, I reported to leaders in San Francisco. So I had a lot of time zones I was spanning, but I still got to be relatively flexible within when I got my work done. But more than flexibility, what I started to prioritize was radical autonomy. And I knew that I would not be able to have that autonomy unless I worked for myself and I set my own terms. And so, what I see with my clients is getting really clear on what they are solving for. So, it's back to that clarify step. And what was more important to me to solve for was that idea of radical autonomy. And then, once that was the North Star, I could start to fill in, okay, what is the number collectively that my husband and I both need to hit in terms of our income so that we could, stay in our home and we can, still, do some things that we want to do and not subsist on ramen noodles and,
Beanies and weenies.
yeah, the things that we did when we were, earlier and had lots of student debt and things like that. So,
College, right?
yeah, but you have to get very clear on what is that one thing that you are trying to solve for, and then how do you fit those other pieces around it?
We do a lot of work. In the National Speakers Association, there's a little mastermind that goes around, and it's primarily off the book Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. And in the book, that is like one of the first questions is, what do you want? And it's amazing to see how many people can't answer that question. And I couldn't even answer the question when I first did it. What's the specific number that you're looking for? And it's hard because we often will look at other people's numbers and say, yeah, that's the number I want. I want that. And it's not really about us and or myself and what do I want in this situation. And how do you help people get past the French philosopher that was, I can't remember the name, but
Rene Girard, the mimetic desire.
Rene Girard, yeah,
Yes.
absolutely.
Yep.
And was so we have, I don't want to have what someone else has, but I just want what's beneficial for me and not have to worry about someone else.
Okay, so we're about to hear an incredible answer from Abby, one that could shift the way you make decisions in your leadership journey. But before we get into it, I want to take a moment to let you know about two quick things. First, If you're enjoying this conversation, you'll love the video Think Letter Upgrade. Every Saturday, I break down leadership lessons like this one into quick, actionable insights that help you navigate high-stakes transitions. So it's free to subscribe, and the upgrade version gets you even more tools to lead with clarity and focus. Now, you can find it over on Beehive, so just search for the Elevate Life Executive Series. Second, if you're in the market for a keynote speaker, maybe for your leadership summit, all hands meeting, or corporate retreat, consider bringing me in. I deliver transformational keynotes grounded in real life resilience. And who knows, we might even end up doing a podcast episode with your CEO and feature your company right here on this show. All right, let's get back to it. Thanks again. And now here's Abby.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I write a monthly newsletter and I'm working on one right now all about how do you get to that clarify step? Because to your point, there are so many voices that are so loud. It's not only, yes, that's what that person's number is, but what did my parents tell me I should want? What did my, the teachers I admired or my bosses that were my mentors, what did they want? And so stripping out that noise is so challenging, and yet really can be such a game changer and allow you to quiet those voices and just listen to the whisper. So a couple things. One is to give yourself the space for self-reflection. I am a big fan of journaling, of meditation, of going on hikes, of therapy, of whatever it takes for you to start to tune into that voice inside you that says, wait, is this path that I'm on the right one? Or, maybe I want something that isn't quite the same as everyone I see around me. But you have to make the time for it, because if you just keep going on autopilot and, now that everything is back and we're all just flying everywhere again. And I think that's why we saw so many people make big changes during COVID, because when things stopped, it was quieter and you did have a chance to drop in. So A, make the time. B, sometimes the messages come not from thinking, but actually from our bodies. And so you talk a lot about bodies and how they can help us evolve, right? So our bodies are our ultimate accountability partners, but we have to be willing to listen to them. And so, I got shingles before I turned 40. It is not a disease that manifests in a lot of people under 40, but I was operating with a lot of stress, with a lot of unprocessed grief, with a lot of things that I felt like I could separate my head, from my body. But the thing is, our bodies speak louder and louder until we are willing to listen to them. So if your body is sending you messages, listen to them, pay attention, think about what your body might be wanting you to change. And so those are just a couple of ways that I think we can tune in to the voices inside ourselves.
This is really good. I'm thinking about, the choices that I had to make, even moving from our family from Virginia to Colorado Springs, where we live now. And it was a big choice. I mean, we talked about it a little bit, but we didn't talk about it from the standpoint of all those 5 C's and how much that could disrupt other things in the family. Um, it was good for the economics of it, it was good career opportunity for myself. My wife said she wanted to a change of pace. She no longer wanted to live in Virginia, which I love. I actually loved Virginia. It was a great spot. And I said, yeah, and I think I'm going to be doing a lot less traveling because, the Olympics and Paralympics come every 2 years. Turns out I was on the road all the time.
Hmm.
And I began building this Paralympic military sport program. And I was going to Walter Reed into this 2004, Walter Reed, then the Brooke Army Medical Center in San Antonio, and then the Naval Hospital out in Balboa Park in San Diego. And that became my little route. And those programs grew and they turned into Warrior Games, Prince Harry's Invictus Games. And all of a sudden I was all over the world doing this stuff. And Alice came back, my wife, Alice said, you said you weren't going to be doing all of this traveling. I said, all right, And so she said, I'm going to become a flight attendant. Now, it wasn't because she wanted to become a flight attendant. She just wanted me to say, no, babe, I'll get off the road. But because we weren't communicating, I was saying, go you. You got this. You can do it. I want to support you. And so now you know you ladies, you can't you got to save face. So so she stuck and she becomes a flight attendant. And the most amazing thing happened without having done any of this really. This whole world opened up to us that we had no idea about. I mean, I'm flying, but I'm a passenger. I'm just get on the plane, sit down, open the laptop, headphones in. Uh, but this whole world opened up to us. And now, fast forward, we've had some incredible experiences with the two of us and our children. Um, but we make home wherever Southwest Airlines lands. So I just go with her on trips, and I'll do my work, and I'll do the work on the plane. I take pictures of her. I play the little fun little jokes like we're dating, or I want to date with her, with the person in the seat that's next to me. Kind of cute, right? And one lady got a little mad at me because I was being a little too forward with her. It's hilarious. But I think that, those are the opportunities that can open up to us, and they can be opened up to us even earlier if we go through your process of those five C's, because it doesn't have to be a negative experience at all. It can be a very positive one. When you are thinking about your clients and the people that you're working with now, how do you get them to see it faster? Because they still are the ones that have to make the commitment to it.
Absolutely. And well, it sounds like in your story that you just shared, it wasn't, you opened up a broader set of choices, which you could have had. You continue to do your travel between those cities. She does her flight attendant thing, and you're seeing each other even less often, right? Because you're uh, off in separate corners of the world. But what I hear you did, you said, okay, we both made these choices, but how can we actually make them work for us and make them serve the idea that we want to spend more time together, which she had already highlighted, and it sounded like you wanted
Right.
that as well. So part
That's
of it
right. Right.
is getting creative about, we clarified what we want. And rather than, just seeing the choices as limiting, part of why checking in is so helpful is you can, you're so in your own life, obviously, by definition. And this is why I think coaching is so powerful, that it takes sometimes someone else who can see something from a different perspective to say, hey, have you considered, this? And I'll give you an example. I am working with a client right now who is a communications expert in a Fortune 50 company who is passionate about singing and songwriting. And, at one point, they thought that their career might be, in the creative arts field. They might want to write a Broadway musical. But income is not predictable. Now they have kids and a mortgage and are the breadwinner. And so this idea of, either I pursue my creative dreams in singing and songwriting, or I continue to climb the corporate ladder. One of the part of the work that we've been doing together is say, might there be this middle path where you can actually bring in those talents to serve your employer and your career. And they actually just presented a musical cabaret at a major conference where this is a different way to share the message. People paid attention because it's not always in a corporate conference that someone breaks out into musical songs to make a point. And now it's actually really serving their career. And so it's partly just thinking about what is the way in to get what you want that might not be a choice that is immediately obvious to you.
That's great. I was thinking, it made me think about it. We said earlier, right before the show started, Jason Saul, who wrote, I think it's called The Third Way. It's out of Chicago. And he has a lot of different stories that he worked with clients. One was Redbox, when Redbox first started opening up, and there was no way for that video system to get off the ground at McDonald's because they weren't going to give the funding, even though they could show like this proof of concept of it. on paper. So they went and got a refrigerator, painted it red, and there was a little guy on the inside that took in the money and the credit cards and everything and sent out whatever was the movie that they wanted. So they proved it over a course of like 2 weeks. This guy in a box, I can always see him there. What is this stuff?
I'm
But
hoping he's
that
not
was
claustrophobic. That would not
I
be,
I
I
hope
would not
not
want that
because
job.
but it worked. They showed they were able to show the proof of concept on the third way because you can only show it. You couldn't show it on paper.
Right.
Was the thing.
Have
But
to
you, well,
experience
how did I
it.
not do it? How you're not going to give me the money if I can't? So it's all that chicken and the egg stuff. The other one that stood out was he's a speaker. I'm not sure if he's still speaking, but he was doing a lot of speaking in London, going from Chicago to London and return. And he didn't want to buy the first class seat because it was astronomically way too high. It's like $12,000. He's like, I'm not buying that. But he didn't want to sit and coach either because he'd be dog tired by the time he got there in order to do the presentation. So he said, how can I figure this thing out? So he went up to the counter on United and said, I would like 3 coach class tickets, please. So he get the whole row, please. And it's less than the first class seat. And he found out he gets 3 meals and he gets so I think there's other things that have to happen for that to happen because every seat is with a has to have a passport with it as well. But there were things that he discovered along the way, but he was eventually able to do it, and he became known as a 3 seat guy because he did it so often. And I said that's just a brilliant way. So you can do it for a couple $1,000s, or maybe 3,000 versus a $12,000 ticket, and he's fully rested. He's got his whole row. He gets 3 meals, so he's nice and fat when he gets over there. Off stale bread. Uh, these sweet leaders are always faced with binary choices, or so they think. Um, Getting them to see a little bit beyond that, expand or cut, stay or leave, pivot or persist. How does the model help challenge the either or thinking? I've always said a little bit once, but I think for this, I'm kind of on this record because I see so many leaders, especially today, they only think they have 2 choices. You got to come back in the office or you're out. In order to get promoted, you need to be in the office. AI or not to AI.
Mhm.
Right? Uh, and how do we get folks to really get out of those blinders off to see?
Yeah, I mean, it's so true. And I think we've all been there where we only see those extremes. And, part of it is once you get really clear on what you're solving for, you can let that be your metric as opposed to, so if you're a company leader, you want profitability and you want engaged employees. So you have to, those are the metrics that you're going to look at. You're not going to look at, how many times are people swiping their badges, per week or, right? Like you have to get really clear on what are those things that are going to be success to you. And then I really think that the idea of experiments, so part of consequences and forecasting is not to say you will have to know perfectly what the consequences of your decision is. It's how do you make manageable small experiments that give you information that let you predict more precisely. And so, rather than thinking as a leader, you need to have all the answers, you could say, we're going to do this experiment. People are saying they don't want to be back in the office for every 5 days a week. So for this next quarter, we're going to let people, choose within, 3 days a week that they're going to be in the office, but we're going to let our results determine whether this experiment has succeeded or not succeeded, rather than, making a mandate and then everyone has to comply. Give everyone a goal that they're driving towards and a very clear result. And then, then you have to be true to your word. So if the experiment is positive, you need to stick with the terms that you set out. And if it does, and if it goes south, then you have information and you could say, okay, that didn't work. Let's keep brainstorming, right, as a team. And I think, one of the things that I learned in my leadership role is that I needed to be very open to solutions coming from my team, as opposed to thinking that, I had to have all the solutions and I needed to be the one. I mean, it's just like parenting, right? Like, you don't have all the answers. You need to create the conditions that you can collectively solve, and that there's that trust and psychological safety. But I think being open to experimentation and being open to the answer not coming from you are two important ingredients.
I'm laughing because I have this image of a person in my mind as an executive who would take that and say, um, they would put the highest numbers up there, the most impossible numbers out there, so that they could bring everybody in, so they would miss the target and everybody has to come back into the office.
Well, people could see
I'm going to
through
stack the deck.
impossible goals too. So,
That's right. Stack of the deck. Stack of the deck. Um, so quick questions for you. These are really sharp and simple. One decision you wish you had made faster.
hmm. Uh, Decision to have children.
Oh, I love it. What's the best question someone can ask themselves when stuck?
What would I tell my friend if they were facing the same question?
Ooh, ooh. What have your kids taught you about decision making?
That values are so important in decision making.
Absolutely. Uh, this is fantastic. I could go on with you for a long time. There is the space and grace to grow, which is in my little model. It's the renewal part, which begins with a rebirth. That's where commitment has been made. So they've already made the commitment. So they may have phantom pains, but commitment is, I say, when the doctor amputated my left leg, I don't get my leg back. So when we actually make a commitment, we it's impossible to go back to the way it used to be. There's a chasm that you can't go back. So you go from high school to college. You're not going back to high school, right? Go college to the workforce. Whatever it is, the chasm has been crossed. You might have phantom pains to want to go back there, but you can't go back there. So now you're in a moment of space and grace because you're no longer the expert. You're in pretty much a space of vulnerability. Uh, I had walked for 29 years. When I had my amputation, I no longer knew how to walk, and certainly not an artificial leg. So I had to give myself space and grace to do it. And then years later, 7 years later, I became so good that I won a silver medal in the long jump. Right? Um, how do you help executives get into that space and grace that you had shared a little? I think you shared a little bit earlier. You said space. I think I said grace. I was putting both words in there for you.
No, I like space and grace. Well, I similar to what you said. I mean, it wasn't your decision to amputate your leg, but once that decision was made, it was your job to make it the right decision. And so I say that when you choose, I mean, their framework is not a silver bullet. It's not a guarantee that everything is going to work out perfectly. But what it does do is give you confidence in your process. And then once you believe you have done the best you could, my co-author has a saying that I love, which is angels couldn't do better. And once you've done the best you could, then you have to put all of your energy into making the choice that you made the right one and living with whatever happens, trusting that you did the best that you could at that given time. And so not to second guess yourself. So that is wasted energy. To your point, you cannot go back. Do not spend time ruminating on what might have been or what could have done or what if, but now you go forward and you do everything in your power to make that the right decision.
Yeah, it's so good. You can't go back. Uh, Ladies and gentlemen, we're talking Abby Davisson, and just an incredible interview. What is something that I is it might be a blind spot to me right now? It's something that you would like to get out that I may have missed.
Um, well, one of the other things that, another way I could answer your what did you have to amputate to elevate question is the belief that work and rest are at odds. And
Mm.
a book that I read right after I started my current business that changed my life is called Rest: Why You Get More Done When You Work Less by Alex Pong. And I have really been doing my best to build my business in a way that incorporates deliberate rest into the business model. And deliberate rest does not mean taking a nap. It could be, it means much more active than you think. For me, it's taking a weekly tennis lesson. It's walking as much as I can all over my lovely city. But unlearning the idea that working hard and playing are competing. I actually think I am a more productive, more creative, more efficient leader because I am now embracing deliberate rest.
Absolutely. That's probably why I missed it, because athletes, we already get, I mean, at the highest level, it's more about the rest and recovery than it is about the training. Because if you don't get the proper amount of rest, I'm not talking physical and the mental breaks as well, you cannot train at your optimum the next day. So you have to get the proper amount of rest that equates to the effort and the work that you have put out. Our team, we begin in October to plan the next year, but we start with the, the breaks that we want,
Mm.
and we protect the days because we know we need those days every quarter. So we just work until we reach that thing, and then we lay everything else down. No phone calls, whatever. Everybody takes a break. So we all schedule that before we even start the year. And that really has helped us. We're in, I think, year number 2 of doing that. So everybody knows what time's coming up. And of course, there's things that will pop up here and there. But at the same time, we're also making sure that people are getting that recovery. Our military does it, right? So when we go off on the military mission, the most important part is when you come back is recovering. So that's why we get 30 days of leave to decompress, so that we can at least get down here before we go off on the next up tempo that's going to take us back up to here. That is critical, and taking the breaks is, I think, is one of the most important things to do. I'm gonna get that book, Alex Pong, to kind of go through in the science part of it. I like to just think I knew it, and then okay, somebody else wrote the book, so let me get the science, and I'll put the science with it later.
Totally.
uh, so thank you so much for being on. You've been just a godsend, and I really appreciate it. How do people get a hold of you?
So my website is abbydavisson.com. I write a monthly newsletter, as I mentioned, that you can find on the website. And then we also have a website for our book, moneylovebook.com, that has a fun quiz you could take to learn about your decision-making style, if you're interested.
I'm gonna have to do that. My decision-making style is do it. Just go ahead and do it. Well, I appreciate you being on. Thank you so much for gracing us with your time. And we will wrap up the show right after this, ladies and gentlemen.
What a rich and revealing conversation. Abby Davisson didn't just share a story. She gave us a system, one that helps leaders make the most out of complex decisions with clarity and confidence. Now, whether you're navigating a career pivot, making a family move, or choosing between competing values, Abby's 5C framework gives us the compass we've been missing. So here they are again, just in case you missed them. Number 1 is clarify. What matters to you the most? And then number 2, communicate with the key people that are involved. Number 3, consider a broad range of options, not just the default path. Then check in with your emotions and your intuition. That's number 4. Number 5 is commit to your decision and move forward with intention. Abby, thank you so much for showing us that decisions don't have to be either or. With courage and reflection, they can be both and. Your work is a gift to leaders everywhere. And our listeners, thank you for spending this time with us on Amputate to Elevate Success, the podcast that is part of the Elevate Life Executive Series on Beehive. If this episode gave you a new way to think about your next big decision, do 3 quick solids for me. Number 1, you know it, like the episode. Number 2, share it with another leader that you admire. And number 3, follow the show so you don't miss what's coming next. And hey, if you're facing a high-stakes moment and need a sounding board, head over to Beehive and sign up for your Elevate Life Executive Strategy session. We'll walk it out together. I'm John Register, and until next time, go forth, inspire your world. Bye for now.